The winter landscape of Central Europe is bleak and uninviting, but it's home to one of Europe's largest surviving birds of prey, the white-tailed eagle. Life is so tough here that the chances of a young eagle making it through its first year are less than 50-50. We follow the story of two young eagles, two young lives with very different outcomes. The journey from egg to adult will take the chick through a world of danger. It's a journey that only the fittest will complete. If each pair of eagles can leave behind just two descendants, the future of this magnificent bird will be secure. Their journey begins in the frozen lands of Central Europe. In many countries, the white-tailed eagle population has disappeared completely. But here in the forgotten land of Belarus, with Poland to the west and Russia to the east, the wild eagle population has not failed, thanks in part to the remote and wild landscape, and thanks to the Soviet Union. Since 1991, Belarus has been a republic, but the influence of the old Soviet system lingers on, and the country has remained underdeveloped, leaving the eagles undisturbed. Each winter, the eagles face a harsh environment. The adults and some hardy youngsters defy the winter snow and deep frosts, taking whatever feeding opportunities they can get. As the thaw begins, fish that froze into the ice during the winter emerge as a ready meal for hungry birds. From a vantage point, the eagle's golden eyes check out the scene. A full-grown eagle needs around half a kilo of fish each day just to survive. Unless they're breeding, white-tailed eagles are not territorial. We think of the majestic bird on a lonely crag, and this gaggle of birds of prey, sharing food with other species, comes as a surprise. Fish is an important part of the white-tailed eagle diet, and in many parts of the world, they're known as sea eagles. The birds are not the only ones looking for food, but fish isn't really what this wolf has in mind. It's for the birds. Although they're hunters, wolves won't turn down a free meal, and the scent of a carcass is music to their noses. Wolves are playful, and bumping up against each other is a sign of high spirits. They have a fantastic sense of smell. A wolf can scent a carcass over a distance of around 10 kilometers. In the deep winter, most carnivores rely on the misfortunes of others to stay alive. Nothing will be wasted. Many animals won't survive the winter, especially if it's a hard one. But their carcasses will continue to provide a supply of meat that lasts through until the spring. Ravens are happy to take whatever the wolves leave behind. They're expert scavengers. The eagle is a large and powerful bird and can weigh in at up to 7 kilos. The ravens are not exactly intimidated, but they do observe the pecking order. The strength of the eagle is legendary, and in parts of Europe, humans were buried with the bones of eagles to protect them in the afterlife. Today, the eagle's strong beak and talons mean that it can extract every last shred of meat from this animal's bones. The eagles need all their strength in the winter, for this is the time they find and court their mates and defend their territories, ready for the breeding season ahead. As spring comes to Belarus, the water begins to flow again. Streams and rivers come to life as fish head for their spawning grounds. The thaw seems to happen almost overnight, and suddenly the land begins to bloom, teeming with life and beauty. The sun warms the forests, and the change in the season brings migratory birds from the south to the rich feeding grounds inland. The eagle is an apex predator. A healthy adult bird has no natural enemies. The principal problem for eagles in the modern world is human activity. In many countries, deforestation and loss of habitat have brought the white-tailed eagle to the brink. Belarus's legacy from their decades in the Soviet Union is a sparse rural population and an absence of modern agribusiness. This is all good news for the survival of the white-tailed eagle. These birds form long-lasting partnerships with their mates and remain equally faithful to the nest itself. The nest is the female's responsibility, and before the all-important mating and egg-laying can take place, there's maintenance to take care of. The Belarus forest offers many different trees that a newly paired couple can choose from. There's the birch, the spruce, very elegant. But for a quality build, they should really go for a nice, flat-topped pine. Mostly the young couple will opt for a self-build, but the established couple, with a few breeding seasons behind them, will probably go for a bit of refurbishment and perhaps a nice extension. They'd better choose well, because an eagle's nest is huge, more than 2 meters across, several meters deep, and weighing up to a ton. Eagles like to nest up high, to give themselves a vantage point, but this pair may have gone a bit too far. They also have a preference for dead trees, but this can leave the nest looking precarious. Has this bird chosen well? While the adult eagles were weathering winter hardships, the ospreys went south. Now they're back to take full advantage of the plentiful fish. In flight, the osprey can resemble an eagle, but they belong to a different family. Their behavior is also quite different. Returning birds find their mates and celebrate the start of another breeding season. They too display a rush of enthusiasm for nesting, feeding and family life. For the male osprey, a return to the nest means another chance to mate. Although at times, the female seems to have a different idea. In ospreys, nest building is the male's job, and sex is clearly an effective motivation. White-tailed eagles and ospreys frequently occupy the same areas. They compete for food, and the eagle has been known to take a catch away from the smaller osprey. By late March, the breeding season is well underway, and this pair of eagles has produced an egg. The female will stay close to the nest and will sit on the egg to keep it warm in the still chilly winter temperatures. Six weeks later, there is a small, white, fluffy nestling, just visible between the parent's strong legs. To begin with, the female spends more time at the nest, while the male brings home the food. She shreds the food and feeds the chick from her scimitar beak. Summer days in northern Europe can be cool, wet and windy. This family pays for the view, with a dangerously exposed nest site for their youngster. Young birds are vulnerable to cold, and this chick's feathers are hardly waterproof. Help arrives, as its mother flies back through the rain to act as a living umbrella. Her offspring will stay dry and warm under her huge wings. By June, young things are popping up all over. These wolf cubs are just beginning to explore their new world. They're completely unaware of the dangers they face. In open country, an eagle could take a small wolf cub. In the forest, they may be safe from eagles, but the adults of the pack are aware of every threat and are quick to move the pups if they think they're at risk. Wolves are social animals, and all of them look out for the pups. This is a supervised nursery, where the pups can play in safety. The more complex and intelligent the animal, the more the young have to learn. This young bear stands on hind legs to see further across the open meadow, a move it may have learned from its mother. Bears love water, and for these cubs, it's a playground. This looks like play, and it is, but it's also an essential part of the young bear's education. They need to be competent equinauts by the time they become independent and responsible for finding their own food. fish this time. But bears are omnivorous, and this youngster is happy just rooting around. It's early summer, and the wetlands are full of breeding birds. The warm weather can be just as much of a threat to the growing chick as the cold weather was. The parents have to make sure that their little ball of fluff gets enough moist food to prevent dehydration. The bulk of the hunting and foraging is done by the male. But now the female decides it's her turn to take a break and leaves Dad in charge of the nest. But what to do? The male shuffles around and eventually adjusts its massive wings to provide the bobbing chick with an avian awning. The ever-energetic ospreys have 2 nestlings and are kept busy catching fish. The demand for fresh food is unceasing, and unlike the eagles, the ospreys rely completely on hunting for their food supply. They hunt and eat only fish, and have many specialized adaptations to help them do this. Now the nest has changed function, from bedroom to dining room. The lakes and waterways of Belarus are home to over 40 species of freshwater fish. They're an important part of the summer diet for humans and animals alike. Fishermen must have endless patience, and this is a quality they share with the white-tailed eagle. The truth is that although our idea of the eagle is that of a fearless hunter, plunging like a thunderbolt from the skies, the reality is rather different. This eagle's strong suit is patience. If it thinks that there might be a free meal in the offing, its capacity for just waiting is quite remarkable. Luckily, this chap is willing to share. Sometimes. Midsummer comes, and there's a stranger in the forest. This animal looks just like a raccoon, but it belongs to the dog family. It's a raccoon dog. Raccoon dogs are incomers to Northern Europe, brought from the Far East to Western Russia, and now they occupy large swathes of Northern Europe. Like the white-tailed eagles, they are opportunistic feeders. High above, the young bird lazily stretches its wing and seems to look at it in surprise. The big nestling is hungry, and its calls for food spur the parents on to keep up a relay of feeding trips. In the months of dependence, the parents may feed this voracious chick up to 100 kilograms of food. The raccoon dog knows from experience that there are frequent feeding mishaps. The young eagle often has food on its mind. As it gets larger, its parents are perhaps a little less willing to purposely share the catch. The raccoon dog will also eat as much as it can through the summer, but like the bear, it will sleep out the winter. There's no such break for the birds. They must continue to feed all the year round. The osprey's popular name is fish eagle, and it's very well kitted out for its job. It can carry a fish as heavy as itself, and in a skillful maneuver, orientates the fish head forward so there's less drag when flying. The osprey's feet are adapted for its slippery prey, with spines to help grip the fish, and a swivel toe, so that the fish can be held in the air with two toes front and back. Their dive speed can reach 130 kilometers an hour, and ospreys often immerse themselves completely to catch their fish. Neither the fish eagle nor the white-tailed eagle are officially endangered, but both are easily disturbed in their breeding territories by intrusive human activity. Ospreys are feisty neighbours, and this one isn't at all pleased that the white-tailed eagle has chosen a perch near their nest. Eagles have been known to take osprey chicks, and that's probably the reason for this behaviour. The agile osprey buzzes the eagle, like a fighter plane homing in on a jumbo jet. The eagle seems not to be worried, as it lifts a wing in mild threat. Eventually it decides enough is enough, and the osprey returns home, triumphant. Domestic life continues for the eagles in their daily round of childcare. The chick is still heavily dependent on them, and they leave him alone in the nest more and more often now, as his demands for food increase. He's safe from predators, so nothing can possibly go wrong. Or can it? This chick's parents have also done a good job of feeding and protection, and now the nestling has a good set of wings to practice with. And practice is what's needed. As they come close to fledging, young birds may seem even larger than their parents. They have longer wing and tail feathers, perhaps to help them in their first efforts at flying. There's a summer storm brewing, and now the chick is alone in its frighteningly lofty eyrie. In the rising wind, the nest itself begins to look insecure. The chick too appears stressed as the wind ruffles its feathers. Finally, the shaking is just too much for him. There's no reassuring parent in sight now. The chick will have to go it alone. The storm is over. The nest has collapsed. But the chick has managed to flutter down to a lower branch. Its troubles are far from over. Hanging on for dear life, the unwilling fledgling decides on his next move. In reality, there's little choice. He must try his luck. But the chick is heavy, and his wings are weak. Takeoff is impossible, and the eaglet is grounded. Sad to say, nature is unlikely to be kind to the young bird. More than half the chicks hatched will not make it through the first year, and this one looks bound for the wrong side of that statistic. There's little that the parents can do. They're not equipped to deal with a breeding calamity like this. They cannot try again until next year, and we can only wish them better luck next time. The wolf cubs too are learning the hard way. They really shouldn't try to sleep on an ant's nest. They chew on scraps that the adults bring them, and still suckle from their mother for nutrition and comfort. They're still babies, a long way from being able to look after themselves. Wolves are very sociable, and these pups belong to the alpha female, the head of the pack. The other females will act as babysitters, making sure that the pups don't get into too much trouble. The summer months pass, and the young bears are also growing up and learning about the world around them. Everything is a potential plaything. Sometimes there's a price to pay, a trade-off between pain and pleasure. Bears can have a long period of dependence on the mother and may stay in her company long after they're weaned. Depending on how many cubs have been born and how fast they gain weight, they may stay right through their second and even third years. Water remains irresistible, but that first fish remains elusive. Wrestling is so much more fun. Water is important to the eagles too, and it comes as a surprise that they can swim. Birds may use water to rid themselves of parasites and to keep cool in the warm weather. As it stands on the bank, the eagle is like a shaman in a cloak of feathers. Summer and winter, the water birds are easy prey for the hunters. Many ducks are shot, and they're not all found, at least not by the human hunter. This eagle still has a family to feed, and it may be that hearing the sound of the gun, he knows that there may be a juicy meal to be found. Lead shot from the hunter's guns is a cumulative poison and can affect the chick's health. It's one of the hazards of living alongside humans. To the eagle, the duck is a useful source of protein for the fast-growing chick. So much to learn in this buzzing, moving, noisy, natural world. The young wolves accompany the pack. They're not much help in the hunt, but they need to see the adults in action. This young eagle too is ready to stretch her wings, and short trips from the nest lead on to longer flights. We can only imagine what the first soaring flight must feel like for the young bird. Once the youngster is confident with her new flying skills, the parents, like the wolves, encourage her to accompany them. Whether scavenging or hunting, the young bird must learn quickly how to go about feeding herself. More and more often, the adults keep their catch for themselves, as if to tell the young eagle that she must soon fly the nest for good. It must come as a rude shock to the youngster. How unfair. The young ospreys are as energetic as their parents and go in for a lot of wing exercise while still in the nest. They seem to manage to take turns. Even in a nest as large as this, there's only room for one wingspan at a time. When fully grown, the osprey's wingspan approaches 2 meters. These chicks are getting there fast. Finally, even they are exhausted. As summer fades and the autumn harvest comes in, the bears are fattening up for their winter sleep. Bears have a large appetite, and their hibernation is more an adaptation for escaping winter food scarcity than for escaping winter cold. Their dens are scarcely warmer than the surrounding environment, but the bears are able to use their stored fat to maintain their body temperatures. Meanwhile, they'll eat everything they can. The adult eagles make the most of the remaining fish and appear quite indifferent to the cries of the youngster. Maybe instinct tells them that they too have to fatten up for the hard times to come. The youngster's hunting skills are still unproven. It's now time for the young bird to take off on the most hazardous journey of her young life. The cranes are going south, and the eagle follows. Her strong wings carry her hundreds of kilometers from her home and into unfamiliar terrain. To survive, the young eagle must stay safe and find food. So far, she's doing quite well, coping with strange sights and very peculiar sounds. It seems incredible that a bird raised in a remote rural environment can survive here, amongst the hustle and bustle of humankind. Her first problem is to find a meal in this unfamiliar landscape. Open water means food, and a duck on a lake looks like an easy target. The eagle circles down for a closer look, and in doing so loses the experienced hunter's elements of surprise. It's as though she hasn't realized that if she can see the duck can see her. The eagle hasn't yet learned that the reeds will provide the duck with cover. But she's still hungry. No, don't even think about it. She settles for a chance to wash off the dust of the journey. Each day brings more noise, more new sights, and some new gastronomic opportunities. Where there's traffic, there's roadkill, and a hungry eagle is not at all fussy about provenance. She's cautious and takes no risks while securing her food. The eagle, fully grown, stands a meter high from beak to tail. She weighs 5 kilos by now, and needs at least half a kilo of food a day to fuel her migratory flight. Another day, another dinner. As autumn turns toward winter, the young eagle comes close to the end of her journey, the Crimean coast. The Crimean Peninsula lies on the northern coast of the Black Sea, and its climate is more forgiving than the deep winter chill of Belarus. Crimea is now an autonomous republic of the Ukraine, and thanks to its geography, it has a long and illustrious history of conquests and independence. It's connected to the mainland by a short land bridge, and that has made it both fortress and gateway. The coastal mountains protect the Crimean coast from the worst of the searing cold north winds. During the Soviet period, the party oligarchs would congregate here for the summer. For the first time, the eagle encounters city life. Yalta has a rich cultural history, with monasteries, palaces and mosques. Now the Crimea is a prized holiday destination. For the young bird, it must feel like a vacation too, as she enjoys the last of the sun's rays and gets a short taste of easy living. Now she's truly living up to her popular name, the Sea Eagle. This coast will be her home for the next 4 or 5 years, unless she chooses to spend her summers back north in Belarus. What governs the Sea Eagle's choices is not yet clear. Why some migrate and others stay put. In its wintry colors, this landscape might not look very inviting, but it has much to offer the water birds. They travel here for refuge from the more hostile climate further north. A host of species will winter here, taking advantage of the open water that they need for feeding. The eagle's golden eyes view them as possible dinners. Many birds are opportunist feeders, and some swans head for fields to forage for leftover crops, like grain or potatoes. Swans and the young sea eagles seem to live happily alongside a variety of other water birds. Although the Soviet Riviera is popular with bathers in the summer, the winter is an entirely different matter, and some winters can be so cold that even the sea freezes. The icy wind forces the birds to huddle together for warmth and protection. But mortality is high, and many will not live to see the spring. Feathers are fluffed up, feet carefully tucked away. The smaller the bird, the more vulnerable it is to cold. The eagle, with her heavy body, can conserve heat well. And now she does the thing that she does best. She watches, waits, and takes whatever feeding opportunities she can. The cold sometimes seems to induce torpor amongst the birds. The eagles, though, remain active. And although they seem to tolerate the smaller birds, they're somewhat possessive amongst themselves. Even the larger swans are not immune from the cold. In these conditions, any weakness or illness will result in death. As usual in nature, nothing is wasted. Even the swan's mangled corpse has a strange beauty. Now the young eagles are managing to feed themselves quite well. This one's been spotted by a belligerent gull, who knows a bird of prey when it sees it, and doesn't like her one bit. Wiser now to the ways of hunting, the young eagle is no longer dependent on carrion or parental feeding. Catching the meal is one thing. Getting it home safely is something else. This mid-air food grab is reminiscent of the mating dance that still lies in the future for these juvenile birds. It could be that these aerobatics develop exactly the skills in close quarters flying that the birds will need for their mid-air courtship. For now, it's all about food and survival. She has several more winters to come before she reaches adulthood and makes the long journey back to the wild forests and lakes that gave her life. Meanwhile, the cold heart of Belarus waits, far to the north, under a thick mantle of snow. The adult birds begin their winter courtship and revisit the nest, where the cycle of life is poised to begin again.